My hands were still shaking when I walked into our family home on Elm Street that Tuesday afternoon in April. The lawyer's office had been cold, sterile, and filled with the kind of silence that makes your heart pound so loud you're sure everyone can hear it. But now, standing in the familiar warmth of my childhood living room, with its worn burgundy carpet and the old grandfather clock that had been ticking the same rhythm for as long as I could remember, I felt like I was in a dream. $12 million. The number kept echoing in my mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "Claire, is that you, honey?" My mother's voice drifted from the kitchen, followed by the familiar sound of her footsteps on the hardwood floor. Sylvia Donovan appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her graying blonde hair pulled back in the same messy bun she'd worn for years. At 54, she still had the kind of sharp blue eyes that could read your thoughts before you'd even finished thinking them. "How did it go with Mr. Peterson?" she asked, settling into her favorite armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern that she'd been meaning to reupholster for the past decade. "And I've been worried sick all morning. Your father's been pacing around the garage like a caged animal." I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. How do you tell your parents that your grandmother left you more money than most people see in a lifetime? How do you explain that you're suddenly wealthy beyond anything you'd ever imagined? "Mom," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma Martha. She left me money in her will." Sylvia's face lit up with a gentle smile. "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart. How much? Enough for a nice vacation? Maybe a down payment on your own place?" I sat down on the couch across from her, my legs suddenly feeling like they wouldn't support me anymore. $12 million, Mom. She left me $12 million. The dish towel slipped from my mother's hands and fell to the floor. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the grandfather clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Sylvia's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak, but no words came out. 12, she finally whispered. 12 million. I nodded, pulling the official documents from my purse. Mr. Peterson showed me everything. The stocks, the investments, the real estate holdings. I had no idea Grandma had so much money. She lived so simply, you know, that little house, her old car, the way she always clipped coupons. "Edward!" My mother's voice suddenly rang out sharp and urgent. "Edward, get in here right now!" Heavy footsteps thundered up from the basement, and my father appeared, his work clothes stained with motor oil, and his thick brown hair disheveled. Edward Donovan was a bear of a man, 6'2", with hands that could fix anything mechanical, and a voice that filled every room he entered. "What's all the shouting about?" he asked, but then he saw my face, saw the papers in my hands, and something in his expression shifted. The will reading. How much did the old lady leave us? "She left Claire $12 million, Sylvia said, her voice hollow with shock. My father's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something else, something that made my stomach clench with unease. 12 million, he repeated slowly. "Well, I'll be damned. Martha always was full of surprises." He rubbed his stubbled chin with his oil-stained hand. "That's quite an inheritance for our family." "Dad," I said carefully, "she left it to me. Specifically to me." Edward's eyebrows rose. "Well, of course she did, sweetheart. But this is family money, isn't it? I mean, Martha was my mother. This house, everything we have, it's all connected. We're going to need to sit down and figure out how to manage this properly." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Manage it?" "Claire, honey," my mother said, leaning forward with the kind of concerned expression she used to wear when I was little and had scraped my knee. "This is a lot of money. More money than you've ever had to handle. Your father and I have experience with finances, with investments. We've been married for 32 years. We've raised you, put you through college. We know how to handle these kinds of situations. But it's my money," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Edward sat down heavily in his recliner, the leather creaking under his weight. "Now, don't get defensive, Claire. Nobody's saying it's not yours. But let's think about this logically. $12 million is enough to change all our lives. We could pay off the mortgage on this house, finally renovate the kitchen like your mother's always wanted. I could expand the garage, maybe even retire early." My heart started pounding again, but this time it wasn't from excitement. "Dad, I don't understand. Why would my inheritance pay for your house renovations?" "Because we're a family," Sylvia said, her voice taking on that patient but firm tone she used to use when explaining why I couldn't have candy before dinner. Everything we have, we share. That's how families work. When you were little and needed money for school clothes, for college, for your car, we didn't hesitate to help you. This is just the reverse. I stared at them both, feeling like I was seeing strangers instead of my parents. This isn't the same thing. You're talking about spending my inheritance on things for yourselves. For us, Edward corrected. For all of us. Look around, Claire. You still live here, don't you? This is still your home. If we improve the house, if we secure our financial future, it benefits everyone. The walls of the living room suddenly felt like they were closing in. I looked around at the familiar space, the family photos on the mantel, my high school graduation picture in its silver frame, the couch where I'd spent countless evenings watching movies with my parents. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. I need some air, I said, standing up quickly. Claire, wait, my mother called after me, but I was already heading for the door. Outside, the April afternoon was crisp and bright, with the kind of New England spring weather that makes you believe winter might actually be over. I walked down Elm Street, past the houses where I'd grown up playing with neighborhood kids, past Mrs. Henderson's garden where she always let me pick flowers for Mother's Day bouquets. But even the familiar sights couldn't calm the turmoil in my chest. My parents' reaction kept playing over and over in my mind. The way my father's eyes had lit up when he mentioned retiring early. The way my mother had automatically assumed the money would be used for family expenses. The casual way they'd both dismissed my ownership of the inheritance. I found myself at Riverside Park, the same place where Grandma Martha used to take me to feed the ducks when I was little. I sat on our old bench, the one where she'd taught me how to skip stones and told me stories about her own childhood during the Great Depression. I wish you were here, Grandma, I whispered to the empty air. I wish you could tell me what to do. As if in response to my words, I remembered something she'd said to me just a few months before she passed away. We'd been sitting in her tiny kitchen, sharing a pot of her famous chamomile tea, when she'd suddenly reached across the table and taken my hand. Claire, she'd said, her voice serious in a way that was unusual for her. I want you to remember something. There will come a time when people will try to tell you what you deserve, what you've earned, what belongs to you. Don't let them. You're stronger than you know, and you have more courage in your little finger than most people have in their whole bodies. At the time, I'd thought she was just being her usual encouraging self. Now, sitting by the pond where we'd spent so many peaceful afternoons together, I wondered if she'd known exactly what would happen when her will was read. The sun was starting to set by the time I walked back home, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reminded me of the watercolors Grandma used to paint. The house looked warm and inviting from the outside, with light glowing in the windows and smoke curling up from the chimney. But as I approached the front door, I could hear my parents' voices inside, and something about their tone made me pause. Can't just let her walk away with all that money, my father was saying. Martha was my mother. I've been taking care of this family for 30 years. That money should be used responsibly. I know, Edward, but we have to be careful how we handle this, my mother replied. Claire's always been stubborn. If we push too hard, she might dig in her heels. Then we don't push. We explain. We show her how much this family has sacrificed for her, how much we've invested in her over the years. We make her understand that this isn't just about her. I stood frozen on the front steps, my hand halfway to the doorknob. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be managed. The money that my grandmother had chosen to leave specifically to me was being discussed like it was already theirs to claim. I turned around and walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I needed time to think, space to process what I'd overheard. I drove aimlessly through Providence for an hour, past the downtown buildings where I'd had my first job, past the university where I'd earned my degree in social work, past all the landmarks of my life. Finally, I ended up at the 24-hour diner on Federal Hill, the same place where Grandma used to take me for chocolate chip pancakes on Saturday mornings. I ordered coffee and sat in our usual booth, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair, refilled my cup without being asked. You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, honey, she said gently. I managed a weak smile. Just family stuff, she nodded knowingly. Family can be the greatest blessing and the biggest challenge all at once. But remember, at the end of the day, you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror. Whatever's going on, Make sure you can live with the choices you make. Her words stayed with me as I drove back to Elm Street later that night. The house was dark, except for the porch light my parents always left on for me. I let myself in quietly, hoping to avoid another confrontation, but as I tiptoed past the living room, I saw my father sitting in his recliner, still awake. "Claire," he said softly, "we need to talk." I paused in the doorway, exhaustion weighing down my shoulders. "Dad, it's late. Can we do this tomorrow?" "Just a few minutes," he said, patting the arm of the couch. "Please." Reluctantly, I sat down, keeping my distance. Edward looked older in the dim light from the table lamp, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd noticed before. "I know today was overwhelming," he began. $12 million. That's a lot to process. But I want you to know that your mother and we're not trying to take anything away from you. We love you, Claire. Everything we've ever done has been for your benefit. I know that, Dad. Do you?" He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Because this afternoon, when you ran out, it felt like you thought we were the enemy, and that breaks my heart." I studied his face in the lamplight, seeing the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night helping me with science fair projects, who had walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation when I was chosen as salutatorian. "I don't think you're the enemy," I said carefully. "But I also don't understand why you immediately started making plans for money that Grandma left to me." Edward sighed heavily. "Because I've been handling financial decisions for this family for 30 years, sweetheart. It's not that I don't trust you, but this is a huge responsibility. $12 million, invested properly, could set up not just you, but future generations of Donovans. Your children, their children. But it could also be lost quickly if it's not managed correctly. What makes you think I can't manage it correctly? You're 29 years old, Claire. You work at a nonprofit making $35,000 a year. You've never owned stocks, never made investment decisions, never dealt with the kind of tax implications this inheritance will bring. This isn't an insult to your intelligence. It's just reality." His words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. I had never dealt with this kind of money before. I didn't know the first thing about investments or tax strategies, but something about the way he said it, the assumption that I was automatically incapable, made my chest tighten with anger. "So what are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm suggesting we set up a family trust, something that protects the money, grows it responsibly, and ensures that everyone benefits. You'd still be the primary beneficiary, of course, but your mother and I would be co-trustees, helping to guide the major decisions." I stared at him, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. "A trust that you and Mom would control. A trust that we would help manage. Yes, for everyone's benefit, including yours." The grandfather clock chimed midnight, and I realized I'd been awake for nearly 20 hours. My brain felt foggy with exhaustion and emotion, but something deep in my gut was screaming that this was wrong. "And I need to sleep on this," I said, standing up. Edward nodded, but as I reached the stairs, he called out softly, "Claire, I hope you'll remember that family is the most important thing we have. Money comes and goes, but family is forever." I paused on the bottom step, my hand gripping the banister. "I'll remember, Dad." But as I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father's version of family loyalty only seemed to flow in one direction. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear my father's voice saying, "Family is forever," in that tone that made it sound more like a threat than a comfort. By the time dawn broke through my bedroom curtains, I felt like I'd been awake for days. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted up from the kitchen, and I could hear my parents moving around downstairs, their voices a low murmur punctuated by the clink of dishes and the scrape of chairs. For a moment, it felt like any other morning from my childhood, safe, familiar, predictable. But then I remembered the papers in my purse, the number that had changed everything, and the conversation I'd overheard the night before. I got dressed slowly, choosing a simple blue sweater and jeans, buying myself time before I had to face them again. When I finally made it downstairs, both my parents were sitting at the kitchen table with steaming mugs and plates of eggs and toast. They looked up at me with identical expressions of careful concern, like they were handling something fragile that might shatter at any moment. "Good morning, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice artificially bright. "I made your favorite, blueberry pancakes. They're staying warm in the oven." "Thanks, Mom," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot. The normalcy of the routine felt surreal, like we were all actors playing parts in a family sitcom while pretending yesterday hadn't happened. Edward cleared his throat. Claire, I hope you had a chance to think about what we discussed last night. I sat down at the table, wrapping my hands around my mug for warmth. I did think about it. A lot. And? Sylvia asked, leaning forward slightly. And I still don't understand why you both immediately assumed the money should be used for family expenses. Grandma left it to me specifically. She could have left it to all of us, but she didn't. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Claire, your grandmother was 91 years old when she died. She had dementia for the last 2 years. Are you sure she was thinking clearly when she made these decisions? Something cold settled in my stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe Martha wasn't in the best frame of mind to make such a significant financial decision. Maybe she didn't fully understand the implications of leaving so much money to someone so young. I stared at him, feeling like he'd slapped me. You're suggesting Grandma wasn't competent when she wrote her will. I'm not suggesting anything, he said quickly. I'm just saying we need to consider all possibilities. $12 million is a lot of responsibility. Maybe she intended for the family to help you manage it. The will was written 3 years ago, Dad, before any signs of dementia. Mr. Peterson went over all the dates with me yesterday. Sylvia reached across the table and patted my hand. Honey, we're not trying to upset you. We just want what's best for everyone. You have to understand our position. Your father worked 2 jobs to put you through college. We refinanced this house to help pay for your student loans. We've invested 30 years of our lives in raising you, supporting you, giving you every advantage we could. And I'm grateful for that, I said. But that doesn't mean what? Edward interrupted. That you owe us anything. That the sacrifices we made don't matter now that you've struck it rich. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. That's not what I'm saying at all. Then what are you saying, Claire? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're ready to take that money and forget about the family that raised you. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but I fought them back. I'm saying that Grandma left this money to me for a reason. Maybe she wanted me to have choices, to have security, to be able to build my own life. At the expense of ours? Sylvia asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Claire, your father is 57 years old. He's been working in that garage since he was 19, destroying his back, his knees, his hands. We've never taken a real vacation, never had the chance to travel or enjoy life while we're still young enough. And now, suddenly, there's this opportunity to change everything, and you want to keep it all for yourself. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years, noticing for the first time how worn everything looked. The linoleum was cracked near the sink, the cabinet doors were hanging slightly crooked, and the refrigerator had developed a persistent hum that we'd all learned to ignore. Had I been selfish to assume the money was entirely mine? Was I being ungrateful after everything they'd done for me? I don't want to keep it all for myself, I said quietly. I just want to understand why you're making plans for it before I've even had 24 hours to process it. Edward stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where he'd taught me to play catch 20 years ago. Because I've been poor my whole life, Claire. I've watched your mother clip coupons and buy generic groceries and wear the same winter coat for 15 years because we couldn't afford a new one. I've worked 60-hour weeks and come home too exhausted to do anything but fall asleep in front of the TV. And now, for the first time in my life, there's a chance for something better, not just for me, but for all of us. When he turned back to face me, there were tears in his eyes. And I'm not trying to steal from you, sweetheart. I'm trying to give our family the life we never had. I felt my resolve crumbling. These were the people who had raised me, loved me, sacrificed for me. They weren't villains. They were just tired, middle-class parents who saw an opportunity to finally have some security. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Sylvia pulled a folder from the counter behind her. We stayed up late last night researching family trusts and investment strategies. We found a financial advisor who specializes in large inheritances. We could set up a meeting for this afternoon. I opened the folder and found printouts of articles about wealth management, trust structures, and tax implications. At the bottom was a business card for Hamilton & Associates Financial Planning. You already made an appointment. Just a consultation, Edward said, returning to the table. Nothing binding. But Claire, time is important with this kind of money. Every day we wait is a day we're not maximizing the inheritance's potential. Something about the phrase, maximizing the inheritance's potential, made my stomach clench again, but I pushed the feeling down. They were right about one thing. I didn't know anything about managing $12 million. Maybe I did need help. What would this trust look like exactly? I asked. My parents exchanged a look that lasted just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. It was the same look they used to give each other when I was a teenager, and they were deciding how much to tell me about adult problems. The financial advisor can explain it better than we can, Sylvia said. But basically, the money would be protected and managed professionally, with distributions made according to family needs and opportunities. Distributions decided by who? By the trustees, Edward said, which would be you, your mother, and me. All decisions would be made together, as a family. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, trying to process what they were telling me. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. Professional management, family involvement, protection from bad decisions, but something about it felt wrong, like a puzzle piece that looked like it should fit but was actually from a different picture entirely. Can I think about it for a few more days? I asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sylvia's smile became strained, and Edward's jaw tightened again. Of course you can think about it, he said. But Claire, opportunities like this don't wait around forever, and the longer we delay, the more taxes and penalties we might face. What taxes and penalties? Inheritance tax, capital gains tax, estate planning implications, Sylvia rattled off. It's all very complicated. That's why we need professional guidance as soon as possible. I nodded, but something nagging at the back of my mind made me want to verify this information myself. I should probably talk to Mr. Peterson about the tax implications, too. Another look passed between my parents. Of course, Edward said. Though I should mention, estate lawyers and financial advisors sometimes have different perspectives on these things. Mr. Peterson's job was just to read you the will. He's not necessarily the right person to advise you on wealth management. The kitchen suddenly felt suffocating. I stood up, my breakfast untouched on the counter. I think I need some fresh air. Claire, Sylvia said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. Please don't shut us out. We're your family. We love you. Everything we're suggesting is for your benefit as much as ours. I paused in the doorway, looking back at them both. My mother's eyes were wide with what looked like genuine concern, and my father's face showed the deep lines of a man who'd worked hard his entire life. They didn't look like villains. They looked like my parents, the same people who had cheered at my soccer games and helped me with homework, and held me when I cried over my first broken heart. So why did I feel like I was drowning? I know you love me, I said. I just need some time to figure this out. I grabbed my jacket and keys and headed for the door, but as I reached for the handle, my father's voice stopped me. Claire, just remember, family is all we really have in this world. Don't let money come between us. Outside, the April morning was crisp and bright, with the kind of clear blue sky that makes everything seem possible. I drove to the Providence Public Library downtown, a massive brick building that had always felt like a sanctuary to me. I found a quiet corner in the reference section and spent the next 3 hours researching inheritance law, family trusts, and wealth management. What I learned made my blood run cold. According to every source I could find, there was no urgent tax penalty for inheriting money. Yes, there would be estate taxes to pay, but those had already been calculated and accounted for by Grandma's estate planning. There was no ticking clock, no immediate financial pressure that required urgent decisions about trusts or management. More importantly, I discovered that in a family trust with multiple trustees, the majority ruled. If my parents outvoted me on any decision, I would have no legal recourse. The money that my grandmother had left specifically to me could be used for anything they decided was in the family's best interest. I sat back in my chair, staring at the computer screen, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. My parents weren't just asking for help managing my inheritance. They were asking me to sign legal control of it over to them. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. The appointment with the financial advisor is at 2 p.m. Please don't be late. Love you. I stared at the message, realizing they had never actually asked if I wanted to meet with a financial advisor. They had simply assumed I would go along with their plan. For the first time since Mr. Peterson had read me my grandmother's will, I felt truly awake. The fog of guilt and confusion that had clouded my thinking since yesterday began to clear, and I saw the situation with startling clarity. My parents weren't concerned about my ability to manage money. They were concerned about my ability to say no to them. I gathered my things and walked out of the library, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. As I drove back toward Elm Street, I passed Hamilton and Associates Financial Planning. Through the large windows, I could see my parents sitting in a conference room with a man in an expensive suit, papers spread out on the table between them. They were at the meeting without me, I pulled into a parking space across the street and watched as the man pointed to different sections of a document, as my parents nodded and asked questions, as my father signed something with a gold pen. My hands were shaking as I took out my phone and called Mr. Peterson's office. "Hi, Peterson, Marr, Williams & Associates. This is Jennifer." "Hi, this is Claire Donovan. I need to speak with Mr. Peterson as soon as possible. It's urgent. He's with a client right now, but I can see if—" "Please," I interrupted. "Tell him Claire Donovan needs to speak with him about Martha Donovan's will. It's an emergency." There was a brief pause, then hold music. A minute later, Mr. Peterson's familiar voice came on the line. "Claire, what's wrong?" "Mr. Peterson, I need to ask you something very important. Are there any restrictions on my inheritance? Any requirements that I share it with my family? Or set up a trust?" "Absolutely not. The will is very clear. The money is yours to do with as you see fit." "Why do you ask?" I watched through the window as my parents shook hands with the financial advisor. "Can someone contest the will? Can they claim my grandmother wasn't competent when she wrote it?" "They could try," he said carefully, "but it would be very difficult. Your grandmother had the will updated regularly over the years, always with full mental competency evaluations. The most recent version was written 3 years ago, well before any cognitive decline. And frankly, Claire, the specific provisions she included suggest she anticipated exactly this kind of challenge." My heart stopped. "What specific provisions?" "There's a section of the will that hasn't been activated yet. It's contingent on certain circumstances. Your grandmother included very detailed instructions for what should happen if anyone tried to pressure you or contest your inheritance. She was quite thorough. I felt tears start to well up in my eyes. But this time they weren't from confusion or guilt. They were from relief and something that felt almost like pride. Even in death, Grandma Martha had been trying to protect me. "Mr. Peterson, can I come see you right now? I think I need to see those additional provisions." "Of course. I'll be here for the next hour." I hung up and took one last look through the window of the financial advisor's office. My parents were still deep in conversation, still planning my future without me. But as I drove away, I realized that for the first time in 2 days, I wasn't afraid anymore. Grandma Martha had known this moment would come, and she had prepared for it. The question now was whether I had the courage to trust her judgment and stand up for myself. As I pulled into the parking lot of Peterson Mudd Williams & Associates, I thought about what the waitress at the diner had said. At the end of the day, you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror. I was about to find out what kind of person I really was. Mr. Peterson's office felt different this time. The same mahogany furniture, the same law books lining the walls, but now I noticed details I'd missed before. The framed photos of his family, the small cactus on his windowsill, the way the afternoon light streaming through the blinds created patterns on his desk. Maybe it was because I wasn't in shock anymore, or maybe it was because I finally felt like I was fighting for something instead of just trying to survive it. "Claire," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "You sounded upset on the phone. What's happened?" I sat down and took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. My parents want me to put the inheritance into a family trust that they would help control. They've been telling me there are urgent tax implications, that I need to make decisions immediately, that I'm too inexperienced to handle this kind of money alone. Mr. Peterson's expression darkened. "And how do you feel about that?" I felt guilty at first, like maybe they were right. Maybe I owed them something after everything they've done for me. But then I did some research at the library, and I realized they were lying about the tax urgency. And then I paused, feeling anger rise in my chest again. Then I drove by the financial advisor's office and saw them in there without me, signing papers. "Without you?" His eyebrows shot up. "Claire, you're the sole beneficiary of this inheritance. No one can make legal decisions about it except you." That's what I thought, but I'm starting to feel like I don't know anything for certain anymore. I leaned forward in my chair. "You mentioned additional provisions in Grandma's will. Provisions that would be activated if someone tried to pressure me. I need to see those." Mr. Peterson opened his filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman, Claire. In all my years of practice, I've never seen anyone plan for family conflict with such precision and foresight." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents, some of which I recognized from our previous meeting, others that were completely new to me. "Men, the first thing you need to understand is that your grandmother spent 2 years planning this inheritance. She didn't just decide one day to leave you $12 million. She researched. She consulted with financial experts. She even hired a private investigator. My blood went cold. A private investigator? To look into your parents' financial situation, their debts, their spending patterns. She wanted to understand exactly what kind of pressure you might face. He slid a document across the desk to me. This is what she discovered. I looked down at the papers, and my hands started shaking. It was a detailed financial report on Edward and Sylvia Donovan, dated 6 months before Grandma's death. The numbers made my stomach drop. My parents were in debt. Serious debt. The mortgage on the house was 3 months behind. My father's business was failing. He owed money to suppliers, to the IRS, to credit card companies. They had taken out loans against the house, loans against his tools, loans against everything they owned. $63,000 in credit card debt, I whispered, reading from the report. $47,000 owed to the IRS. The house is in pre-foreclosure. Your grandmother suspected they were in financial trouble when your father started asking her for money last year, Mr. Peterson said gently. Small amounts at first, always with good reasons. Your mother needed dental work. The car needed repairs. The business had a slow month, but the requests became more frequent, and the amounts got larger. I thought back to the past year, trying to remember if I'd noticed any signs. Had my parents seemed stressed? Had there been arguments about money? I'd been so focused on my own life, my job at the nonprofit, my small apartment downtown that I was saving up to buy, that I'd missed all the warning signs. She wanted to help them, Mr. Peterson continued, but she was also worried about enabling destructive financial behavior. More importantly, she was concerned about what would happen to you if they saw you as their solution to their problems, so she left everything to me instead of them. Yes, but she also included very specific instructions for what should happen if they tried to manipulate or pressure you. He pulled out another document, this one with Martha Donovan's signature at the bottom and a notary seal. This is what we call a conditional codicil. It's activated if certain circumstances occur. I read the document, and with each paragraph, I felt like I was hearing my grandmother's voice speaking directly to me from beyond the grave. If my granddaughter Claire is pressured, manipulated, or coerced by any family member to share, redistribute, or relinquish control of her inheritance, the following provisions shall take immediate effect. The conditions were startlingly specific. If anyone tried to contest the will, they would be permanently excluded from any future inheritance. If anyone tried to claim financial distress as a reason for Claire to share the money, detailed evidence of their poor financial decisions would be released to the family. If anyone set up meetings with financial advisors without Claire's explicit consent, it would trigger an immediate legal review of their actions. But the most shocking provision was at the bottom of the page. If Edward and Sylvia Donovan attempt to gain control of this inheritance through emotional manipulation, family pressure, or deceptive financial advice, Claire is hereby authorized to reveal the enclosed letters, which contain my complete assessment of their character and my true reasons for excluding them from this inheritance. Letters? I asked, looking up at Mr. Peterson. He reached into the folder and pulled out 2 sealed envelopes, each with a name written in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. One said, "For Edward," and the other said, "For Sylvia." She wrote these 6 months ago, after the private investigator's report came back. She made me promise to give them to you if this situation arose, with instructions that you should read them first, and then decide whether your parents should see them. My hands were shaking as I took the envelopes. They felt heavier than paper should feel, weighted with secrets and truths. I wasn't sure I was ready to know. "There's one more thing," Mr. Peterson said, his voice unusually gentle. Your grandmother also left you this." He handed me a 3rd envelope, this one addressed simply to "My dearest Claire." I opened it with trembling fingers and unfolded a single sheet of paper covered in my grandmother's neat cursive. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, then I was right about what would happen when you inherited my money. I'm so sorry you have to go through this, but I'm not sorry for leaving everything to you. You are the only person in our family who has ever loved me without expecting something in return. Your parents are not bad people, Claire, but they are desperate people, and desperate people make choices that hurt the ones they love. I've watched them struggle financially for years, and I've seen how that desperation has changed them. They've started to see everyone around them, including you, as potential solutions to their problems rather than as people to be cherished. The money I'm leaving you isn't just about financial security, it's about freedom. Freedom to choose your own path, to help others if you want to live according to your own values rather than other people's expectations. Don't let anyone, even people who love you, convince you that your dreams matter less than their emergencies. I know they will try to make you feel guilty. They will remind you of every sacrifice they've made, every dollar they've spent on you, every sleepless night they've endured as parents. All of those things are true, Claire. But they are also the basic requirements of parenthood, not debts that you owe. Trust your instincts. You are stronger and wiser than you know. And remember that the people who truly love you will support your choices even when those choices don't benefit them. All my love, Grandma Martha P.S. The key to my safe deposit box is taped under the bottom drawer of my jewelry box, which I left to you. Inside the box, you'll find documentation of every loan I made to your parents over the past 5 years, and evidence of how they spent that money. I hope you never need this information, but if you do, it's there. I sat in silence for several minutes, the letter clutched in my hands, trying to process everything I'd learned. My grandmother hadn't just left me money, she'd left me ammunition, evidence, documentation, proof of everything I was beginning to suspect about my parents, motivations. But along with the relief of finally understanding the situation, I felt a crushing weight of sadness. My grandmother had spent her final months not planning for peaceful rest, but preparing for a family war that she knew would come after her death. Mr. Peterson, I said finally, what would you do if you were me? He leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. Claire, I've been practicing family law for 30 years. I've seen money tear families apart, but I've also seen families destroy themselves over much smaller amounts than this. What I've learned is that the money is never really about the money. It's about power, control, and who gets to make decisions about the future. But they're my parents. Yes, they are. And that relationship will always matter. But you're also an adult woman who has just inherited a substantial sum of money from someone who specifically chose to leave it to you. You have to decide whether you're going to honor your grandmother's trust in you, or whether you're going to let other people's financial problems become your responsibility. I thought about the financial advisor's office, about my parents signing papers without me, about the lies they'd told me about tax urgency. I thought about the years of small requests for money that Grandma had documented, the pattern of dependence that had slowly developed. But I also thought about my father's calloused hands from 30 years of manual labor, my mother's genuine tears when she talked about never taking a real vacation, the sacrifices they had made to raise me and give me opportunities they'd never had. If I don't help them, they could lose the house, I said. That's true, but if you give them access to your inheritance, you could lose control of your entire future. And based on their financial history, there's no guarantee that any amount of money would solve their problems long term. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Providence streets where I'd grown up. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably waiting for me to come home, expecting me to agree to their trust fund plan, expecting me to be the solution to all their problems. I need to go home and talk to them, I said. Claire, Mr. Peterson said, standing up as well. Before you do that, I want you to take these documents with you, all of them. Read your grandmother's letters to your parents. Look at the financial documentation. Make sure you understand the full scope of the situation before you make any decisions. I gathered all the papers, including the sealed letters for my parents, and put them in my purse. They felt like they weighed 100 pounds. And Claire, he added as I reached the door, remember that you don't owe anyone access to your inheritance, no matter how much they've done for you. Your grandmother left this money to you because she trusted your judgment. Try to trust it too. The drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. With each block I passed, I felt like I was driving toward a confrontation that would change everything between my parents and me forever. There would be no going back to the way things were before yesterday. No pretending that money hadn't revealed things about our family that maybe we'd all been trying to ignore. When I pulled into the driveway on Elm Street, both my parents' cars were there. Through the kitchen window, I could see them sitting at the table, probably waiting to hear about the financial advisor meeting they thought I'd attended. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gathering courage and reading through Grandma's letter one more time. The phrase that stuck with me was, "Trust your instincts. You are stronger and wiser than you know." I thought about the little girl who used to sit with her grandmother in this same driveway, listening to stories about women who had fought for their independence, who had stood up for themselves when no one else would. Grandma Martha had always told me I was brave, even when I didn't feel brave at all. Maybe it was time to find out if she was right. I walked up to the front door, my purse heavy with documents and evidence and the truth about my family's financial situation. As I put my key in the lock, I heard my father's voice from inside. "There she is. Claire, how did the meeting go? Did you like the financial advisor?" I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, looking toward the kitchen where my parents were waiting with expectant faces and hopeful smiles. "I didn't go to the meeting," I said simply. The silence that followed was so complete. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. "Or, what do you mean you didn't go?" my mother asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I mean I drove by the office and saw you both in there without me, making plans for my money without asking me." I walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table, setting my purse down with a deliberate thunk. "We need to have a conversation about what's really going on here." My father's face had gone pale. "Claire, I can explain." "No more explanations, Dad. No more lies about tax urgency or investment strategies or what Grandma intended." I looked at both of them. These people who had raised me and loved me, and were now trying to manipulate me. I know about the debt. I know about the house being in foreclosure. I know about all of it. The color drained from my mother's face. "How could you possibly know that?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the private investigator's report, setting it on the table between us. And because Grandma knew too, she knew everything. The silence in our kitchen stretched on for what felt like an eternity. My parents stared at the private investigator's report like it was a bomb that had just landed on our table, which, in many ways, it was. My father's hands were clenched into fists, and my mother had gone so pale, I was worried she might faint. Finally, my father found his voice. "Claire, this isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like, Dad." I kept my voice steady, drawing strength from my grandmother's letter that was still folded in my hand. "You're both drowning in debt. And the minute you heard about my inheritance, you saw it as your life preserver." Sylvia reached across the table toward me, her eyes filled with tears. "Honey, yes, we're struggling financially, but that doesn't mean we don't want what's best for you. We genuinely believe that managing this kind of money is too much for someone your age. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Why all the lies about tax penalties and urgent decisions?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the research I'd done at the library. There are no immediate tax consequences. There's no rush to make investment decisions. You made all of that up to pressure me. My father's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the anger that he usually kept hidden behind his gentle demeanor. "We didn't make anything up. We simplified some complex financial concepts because we didn't want to overwhelm you. You went to a financial advisor without me and signed papers about my inheritance." I could feel my own anger building, hot and righteous. How is that simplifying? How is that looking out for my best interests? "We were trying to get information," Sylvia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We wanted to understand the options before we presented them to you." I reached into my purse and pulled out the sealed letters my grandmother had left for them. She knew this would happen. Grandma Martha knew exactly how you would react to me inheriting money, and she prepared for it. I set the letters on the table next to the financial report. My parents stared at them like they were venomous snakes. "She left you each a letter," I said. "Do you want to know what they say, or should I read them to you?" Edward's face had turned red. "I don't need to read anything from my mother to understand this situation. She's gone, Claire. Whatever games she was playing, whatever manipulations she set up, she's not here to see the damage they're causing to our family." "Games?" I felt something inside me snap. "Protecting me from manipulation is a game to you." "Your grandmother always resented us," Sylvia said, her voice breaking. "She never thought we were good enough for you. She never approved of the way we raised you, the choices we made. This inheritance, these letters, it's her way of driving a wedge between us, even from the grave." I stared at my mother, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. "Mom, she left me $12 million because she loved me. She left me these protections because she knew you would do exactly what you're doing right now." "And what exactly are we doing?" Edward demanded, standing up from the table. "Caring about our daughter? Trying to help her make good decisions? Wanting our family to have financial security? You're trying to steal my inheritance." The words came out louder than I'd intended, echoing off the kitchen walls. "You saw that money and immediately started making plans for how to spend it. You lied to me about tax implications. You scheduled meetings without me. You tried to manipulate me into signing control over to you. How is any of that caring about me?" "Because you're 29 years old and you don't know anything about managing wealth," my father shouted back. Because we've been your parents for 29 years and we've never led you wrong before. Because we love you, and we don't want to see you make mistakes that could cost you everything. Or because you're in debt up to your eyeballs, and you see my inheritance as your get-out-of-jail-free card. The words hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. My father's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, hurt, and finally something that looked like defeat. "Yes," he said quietly, sinking back into his chair. "Yes, we're in trouble financially. Yes, we hoped that maybe this money could help all of us. Is that so wrong?" For a moment, seeing the exhaustion and desperation in his face, I felt my resolve waver. This was my father, the man who had taught me to drive, who had stayed up all night when I had pneumonia as a kid, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for my college textbooks. But then I remembered the lies, the manipulation, the meeting they'd attended without me, and my anger returned. "It's wrong when you lie to get it," I said. "It's wrong when you try to manipulate me into giving up control of my own inheritance. It's wrong when you make plans for my money without including me in the decision." Sylvia was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Claire, we never meant to hurt you. We're scared, okay? We're 50-something years old. We have no retirement savings. The house is about to be foreclosed on, and your father's business is failing. When we heard about the inheritance, it felt like a miracle, like maybe, finally, our family could have some security. But it's not your miracle, Mom. It's mine. Grandma left it to me, not to us." "Why?" Edward's voice was raw with pain. "Why did she leave everything to you, and nothing to me? I was her son. I took care of her when she got sick. I made sure she had everything she needed." I looked at this broken man across from me and felt something crack in my chest. Whatever anger I had toward my parents, I could see that they were genuinely suffering, genuinely desperate. "Do you want to know why?" I asked, picking up the letter addressed to him. "Because she wrote it all down." I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. My grandmother's handwriting seemed to fill the room with her presence. "Dad, do you want me to read this out loud, or do you want to read it yourself?" He held out his hand silently. I gave him the letter and watched as his eyes moved across the page. With each sentence, his face grew more pained, more defeated. After several minutes, he set the letter down and looked at me with eyes that were completely broken. She says I never learned the difference between loving someone and needing them," he said quietly. "She says I spent my whole adult life seeing her as a source of financial help instead of as a person. She says she watched me teach you to be independent while I remained dependent on others." He picked up the letter again, his hand shaking. She says she left the money to you because you're the only person in the family who ever asked her how she was feeling instead of how much money she had." Sylvia reached for her own letter with trembling fingers. As she read it, her tears became sobs. "What does yours say, Mom?" "That I enabled your father's dependence. That I taught you to be strong while I remained weak. That I—" She paused, struggling to get the words out. "That I spent 20 years complaining about not having enough money while never learning to manage the money we did have." She looked up at me with devastation in her eyes. "She documented everything, Claire. Every time we asked her for money, every loan we never paid back, every promise we broke about changing our financial habits. She was keeping track the whole time. I felt like I was watching my parents shrink before my eyes, becoming smaller and more fragile with each revelation. The anger I'd been carrying for the past 2 days began to transform into something more complicated, a mixture of sadness, disappointment, and despite everything, love. "There's more," I said quietly, pulling out the documentation from my purse. "She kept records of every loan she made to you over the past 5 years. $47,000 in total. Money that was supposed to be for emergencies but was spent on vacations, new electronics, home improvements you couldn't afford." I spread the papers on the table. Bank statements, loan agreements, receipts showing how the money had been spent. My parents looked at the evidence of their own financial irresponsibility laid out in black and white. "She also left me a key to her safe deposit box," I continued, "with documentation of your credit card spending, your business expenses, your mortgage payment history. She wanted me to understand exactly what I'd be getting into if I decided to help you financially." Edward buried his face in his hands. "She was right, about all of it. We did see her as a bank instead of as a person. We did teach you to be independent while we remained dependent ourselves. And when she died, our first thought wasn't grief. It was relief that maybe our money problems were over. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of my mother crying and the eternal ticking of the grandfather clock. I sat there surrounded by the evidence of my family's dysfunction, feeling like I was at a crossroads that would determine the rest of our relationships. "I need to ask you something," I said finally. "And if I help you now, if I pay off your debts and save the house, what happens the next time you're in trouble? What happens when you retire and need money? What happens when you want to travel or renovate or buy new cars? Do I become your personal ATM for the rest of your lives?" Neither of them could look at me. "Because Grandma was right," I continued. "You both started seeing me as a solution to your problems the minute you found out about the inheritance. Not as your daughter who inherited money, but as the person who could fix everything that's wrong with your financial situation. We don't want that," Sylvia whispered. "We don't want to be dependent on you. But you are asking to be dependent on me. That trust you wanted me to set up, that would have made me legally responsible for supporting this family for the rest of our lives." I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where I'd played as a child. Everything looked the same. The old swing set, the garden where my mother grew tomatoes, the garage where my father worked on cars. But I knew that after today, nothing would ever be the same again. "I'm going to pay off your debts," I said, still looking out the window. I heard them both gasp behind me. All of them. The credit cards, the IRS, the mortgage arrears. "I'm going to save the house and give you a fresh start. Claire." My father's voice was thick with emotion. "You don't have to." "But," I said, turning around to face them. "There are conditions." I walked back to the table and sat down, looking at both of them with the kind of serious expression I'd learned from watching my grandmother handle difficult conversations. "First, you're both going to financial counseling, real counseling, with a certified credit counselor, not just a financial advisor who wants to sell you products. You're going to learn how to budget, how to manage money responsibly, how to live within your means." They nodded eagerly. "Second, I'm not setting up any kind of trust or joint account. The rest of the inheritance remains entirely under my control. You don't get input on how I invest it, spend it, or save it." "Of course," Sylvia said quickly. "Third, this is it. This is the one and only time I'm bailing you out of financial trouble. If you run up debt again, if you make poor financial choices again, if you find yourselves in trouble again, you figure it out yourselves. I will not be your safety net anymore." Edward was nodding so vigorously I worried he might hurt his neck. "Yes, absolutely. We understand. And fourth," I said, pulling out one more document from my purse, "you're both going to sign this agreement stating all of these conditions, notarized and legally binding, because I love you both, but I don't trust you anymore." The words hit them like physical blows. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her, and my father's face crumpled with pain. "You don't trust us," Sylvia whispered. "Mom, you lied to me about tax implications to pressure me into giving up control of my inheritance. You scheduled meetings with financial advisors without telling me. You tried to manipulate me using guilt about everything you've done for me as parents. How can I trust you after that?" "But you're still going to help us," Edward said, confusion evident in his voice. "I'm going to help you this one time, because I love you, and because Grandma's letters made me understand that your desperation comes from fear, not greed. But love and trust are two different things, and trust has to be rebuilt." I gathered all the papers from the table, the financial reports, the letters, the documentation of loans and spending, and put them back in my purse. "I need you both to think very carefully about whether you can accept these conditions," I said, standing up from the table. "Because if you can't, if you try to pressure me again, or manipulate me, or make me feel guilty for maintaining boundaries with my own inheritance, then I walk away and you handle your financial problems yourselves." I headed toward the kitchen door, then paused and looked back at them one more time. "Grandma Martha left me that money because she believed I was strong enough and wise enough to handle it responsibly. She also left me the tools to protect myself from people who might try to take advantage of that inheritance, even people I love." I took a deep breath, feeling more adult than I'd ever felt in my life. "I hope we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of manipulation. But that choice is up to you." As I walked toward the stairs, my father called out, "Claire?" I turned back. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping us, and for being stronger than we were." I nodded and went upstairs to my room, closing the door behind me. Through the window, I could see the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I sat on my bed and pulled out my grandmother's letter one more time. Trust your instincts. You are stronger and wiser than you know. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I was finally living up to her faith in me. 3 months later, I was sitting in the same coffee shop where Grandma Martha used to meet me for our weekly catch-up sessions, watching the early July sun filter through the windows and thinking about how much had changed since that terrible April afternoon when my world turned upside down. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Financial counseling session went well today. The counselor says we're making real progress with the budgeting. Dad wanted me to tell you the garage is doing better too. 3 new regular customers this month. Hope you're having a good day at work. Love you. I smiled as I read it, then took a sip of my chamomile tea, the same kind Grandma always ordered. It had taken 2 months of awkward conversations, family dinners that felt like diplomatic negotiations, and more tears than I care to count. But slowly, carefully, we were rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of financial desperation. The legal agreement had been signed within a week of our confrontation. I'd paid off their debts as promised, all $63,000 in credit cards, the $47,000 owed to the IRS, and the $16,000 needed to bring the mortgage current. It had taken a significant chunk of my inheritance, but I'd still had more money left than I'd ever dreamed of having. More importantly, my parents had kept their word. They'd enrolled in financial counseling immediately, started attending sessions twice a week, and had begun the slow process of learning how to manage money responsibly. My father had restructured his business with the help of a small business advisor, and for the first time in years, he was breaking even instead of bleeding money. The change in them was remarkable. Without the constant stress of crushing debt, both my parents seemed lighter, younger somehow. My mother had started volunteering at the local literacy center, something she'd always wanted to do, but never had time for when she was working overtime to pay bills. My father had begun taking Sundays off for the first time in 20 years. And last week he'd even suggested they take a weekend trip to the mountains, a modest trip they could actually afford with their new budget. But the most significant change was in how they treated me. Gone were the subtle hints about family expenses, the casual mentions of things they needed, the assumption that my financial situation was somehow connected to theirs. They asked about my job at the nonprofit, my volunteer work with literacy programs, my plans for the future, not because they wanted something from me, but because they were genuinely interested in my life as an independent adult. It hadn't been easy to get there. There had been several difficult conversations, a few setbacks, and more than one moment when I'd wondered if our relationship could really survive the damage that had been done. But gradually, we'd all learned to navigate this new dynamic where I was their daughter, who happened to have money, rather than their daughter whose money they needed. The inheritance had changed my life in ways I'd never expected. I'd been able to quit my stressful job at the understaffed nonprofit and start my own organization focused on financial literacy education for young women, something that felt like a perfect tribute to my grandmother's memory. I'd bought a small house in Federal Hill, close enough to visit my parents regularly but far enough away to maintain my independence. I'd also started dating again, something that had felt impossible when I was living at home and struggling to establish my own identity. Mark was a teacher I'd met through my volunteer work. A kind, funny man who knew about my inheritance but seemed genuinely uninterested in my financial situation. When I'd told him about the family drama earlier in the year, he just nodded and said, "Money has a way of revealing people's true priorities, doesn't it?" But perhaps the most meaningful change was my relationship with my grandmother's memory. I'd had her house cleaned out and sold, but I'd kept her jewelry box with the secret compartment, her watercolor paints, and her collection of recipe cards written in her careful handwriting. I'd also kept visiting her grave every few weeks, usually bringing flowers from the garden I'd started in my new backyard, the same types of flowers she used to grow. On one of those visits, about a month after the confrontation with my parents, I'd sat by her headstone and told her everything that had happened. I'd thanked her for preparing me for the battle I'd had to fight, for giving me the tools and the courage to protect myself, and for trusting me with the responsibility of her life's savings. "I hope I made you proud, Grandma," I'd whispered to the quiet cemetery. "I hope I proved that you were right to have faith in me." The July afternoon was warm and peaceful as I finished my tea and prepared to head back to my office. I had a meeting with a group of high school seniors who wanted to start a financial literacy club at their school. Exactly the kind of project that filled me with the same joy I used to feel when Grandma would tell me stories about strong women who'd fought for their independence. As I gathered my things, my phone rang. It was my father. "Hi, Dad. Claire, I hope I'm not bothering you at work. I know you're busy with the new program launch." "No, it's fine." I was just finishing up a coffee break. What's up? There was a pause, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. I wanted to call because today marks 3 months since we signed that agreement, and I realized I never properly apologized to you. I sat back down, surprised by the serious tone in his voice. Dad, we've talked about this. We're moving forward. No, let me say this. Please. His voice was thick with emotion. Claire, what your mother and I did to you was wrong. Not just financially irresponsible or manipulative. It was wrong on a fundamental level. We treated you like a solution to our problems instead of like our daughter. We lied to you. We tried to manipulate you. We made plans for your future without including you in the decisions. I felt tears starting to build behind my eyes, but I stayed quiet and let him continue. I've been thinking a lot about what your grandmother wrote in that letter, about the difference between loving someone and needing them. I spent so many years needing you to be our safety net, our backup plan, our solution to financial stress, that I forgot to just love you for who you are. Dad, I'm not finished, he said gently. I also want you to know that watching you handle this situation, the way you stood up for yourself, the way you balanced compassion with boundaries, the way you honored your grandmother's trust in you, it made me realize that somewhere along the way, despite our mistakes, we raised an incredible daughter. I was crying now, sitting in my grandmother's favorite coffee shop, overwhelmed by emotions I'd been holding back for months. You didn't just inherit money from Martha, sweetheart. You inherited her strength, her wisdom, her ability to see people clearly and still choose to love them. And I'm so proud to be your father, not because of what you can do for us, but because of who you are. Thank you, I whispered, my voice breaking. That means everything to me. I love you, Claire. Not your bank account, not your ability to solve our problems, not what you can provide for this family. Just you, exactly as you are. After we hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, letting the tears come and thinking about the long journey we'd all taken to get to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been quick, but we'd found our way back to being a family, a healthier family than we'd been before. That evening, I drove over to Elm Street for our weekly family dinner. It had been my idea to reinstate the tradition, but with new ground rules, no discussion of money, no guilt trips about the past, and no assumptions about the future. Just 3 adults who happened to be related, sharing a meal and catching up on each other's lives. When I walked into the kitchen, I found my parents working together to prepare dinner, something that had become more common as their stress levels decreased and their relationship improved. My mother was making her famous lasagna, and my father was assembling a salad with vegetables from the garden they'd finally had time to plant. Smells incredible in here, I said, hugging them both. Wait until you see what we're planning for dessert, my mother said, grinning. I finally tried that chocolate cake recipe from your grandmother's collection. The one she always said was too complicated to bother with. As we sat down to eat, surrounded by the familiar warmth of the kitchen where I'd grown up, I thought about all the family dinners we'd shared in this room over the years. There had been celebrations and arguments, laughter and tears, moments of joy and periods of tension. But this dinner felt different from all the others. Lighter somehow, more genuine, like we were all finally free to be ourselves instead of playing roles we thought the others expected. I have some news, I announced, as we were finishing the main course. Both my parents looked up expectantly. I've been asked to speak at a conference about financial literacy education next month. It's in Chicago, and they want me to talk about my work with young women and financial independence. Claire, that's wonderful, my mother exclaimed. Your first speaking engagement. Actually, I said, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement. I was wondering if you'd both like to come with me. Not to the conference itself, but just for the trip. We could make a long weekend of it, see the city, spend some time together away from home. My parents exchanged a look that I'd learned to read over the past few months, the look that said they were checking with each other before making any decision that involved spending money. We'd love to, my father said carefully, but we'd need to make sure it fits in our budget. It would be my treat, I said quickly, then caught myself. I mean, if you're comfortable with that, I know we've been working on maintaining boundaries, but this feels different to me. More like celebrating something together rather than solving a problem. Sylvia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I think that sounds lovely, sweetheart. And you're right, it does feel different. As we moved on to my mother's chocolate cake triumph, I realized that this was what my grandmother had wanted for all of us. Not just financial security, but the freedom to make choices based on love rather than desperation. The ability to give gifts freely rather than feeling obligated to solve other people's problems. The strength to maintain healthy relationships even when money complicated everything. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to drive home to my own house, my father walked me to my car, something he'd started doing at every visit, like he was trying to make up for all the times he'd taken my presence for granted. "Claire," he said as I unlocked my car door, "I want you to know that what happened this spring, as painful as it was, I think it was necessary. We needed to face some hard truths about ourselves, about our family dynamics, about the way we'd been handling our relationship with you." I leaned against my car, looking at this man who had raised me and disappointed me and was now working so hard to rebuild our relationship. "Do you think Grandma knew it would work out this way?" I asked. He considered the question for a long moment. "I think Martha knew you better than any of us realized. I think she saw strength in you, that we were too busy or too stressed or too focused on our own problems to recognize, and I think she trusted that strength enough to put you in an impossible situation, knowing you'd find a way to handle it with grace, even when it meant standing up to you and Mom, especially then," he said, smiling sadly. "Well, she knew that's what you'd need to do to become the woman she believed you could be." As I drove home through the familiar streets of Providence, I thought about the woman I'd become over the past few months. I was stronger than I'd been before, more confident in my own judgment, more comfortable with setting boundaries and standing up for myself, but I was also more compassionate, having learned that people's worst behavior often comes from their deepest fears. The inheritance had given me financial freedom, but more than that, it had given me the opportunity to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to please everyone around me. It had forced me to learn the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of, between being loving and being manipulated. When I got home to my little house, I sat in my living room and looked at the framed photo on my mantel, a picture of me and Grandma Martha from last Christmas, both of us laughing at some joke I couldn't remember now. She looked so proud in that photo, like she was looking at someone she'd helped create. "Thank you, Grandma," I said to the photo. "For the money, yes, but mostly for believing I was strong enough to handle everything that came with it." Outside my windows, Providence was settling into another summer evening. Somewhere across town, my parents were probably cleaning up the dinner dishes and maybe planning their budget for the Chicago trip. Somewhere else, young women were struggling with financial decisions and family pressures, trying to find their own strength and independence. And here I was, 29 years old, and truly independent for the first time in my life, with the resources and the knowledge and the courage to help other people find their own way to freedom. It wasn't the life I'd imagined 6 months ago, but it was better than anything I could have planned for myself. My grandmother had left me more than money. She'd left me the tools to build a life I could be proud of, relationships based on respect rather than need, and the confidence to trust my own judgment even when it meant disappointing people I loved. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about the conference in Chicago, about the work I was doing with financial literacy education, about the slow but steady rebuilding of my relationship with my parents. There would be more challenges ahead, more difficult conversations, more moments when I'd have to choose between being liked and being respected. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had learned that I could handle whatever came my way, that I could be both loving and strong, that I could honor my grandmother's faith in me while forging my own path forward. The inheritance had changed everything, but it had also revealed what had been true all along. I was Martha Donovan's granddaughter, and that meant I had the strength to face whatever life brought my way. And for the first time since this whole journey began, that felt like more than enough.